The 2017-18 season was one of the most important in history, and that sounds odd because what actually happened that year? We had transfers that just completely changed the course of football, proper iconic matches and goals that we still remember today, and it was one of the last Arsenal Fan TV Wenger out videos. And let's start there, not on Arsenal Fan TV but on Arsene Wenger, because he left Arsenal in 2018. The man who joined in 1996, in the next decade he won 3 Premier League titles, 4 FA Cups, got to a Champions League final, but as we all can remember, after the Emirates era, kind of all went wrong for Arsenal, didn't it? Yes, they still won some FA Cups in the 2010s, but they never really mounted a proper title challenge again. And I dare someone in the comments to tell me that Leicester season was a title charge, because it was Leicester, Spurs, then Arsenal, and then somehow Arsenal came second and Spurs bottled a 2-horse race. But the sad part was, it did get toxic, didn't it? It got toxic because the Arsenal fans, a portion of them, and a very loud portion of them, wanted Arsene Wenger to not be at the club anymore.
He has to go, blood. He has to go, blood.
It just seemed completely split in the middle. Some loved him and would love him to the day he dies, and some wanted a new generation, but a lot of them were saying it in very disrespectful ways. So I am glad that he left in 2018 because I think it would have got worse. However, we can't have revisionist history, as it seems like we're doing everything at the moment. Arsene Wenger's last years at Arsenal were completely inflated by those FA Cups because he didn't challenge for the title, he barely challenged in the Champions League, and his biggest achievement, unfortunately, was getting 4th most seasons. And nowadays, that's an absolute godsend. If you can get in the top 4, then you are a brilliant manager. In my opinion, there's more competition now, because we didn't have Aston Villa, Newcastle, Nottingham Forest this season, and all these teams trying to push for, top 7 or so. It was mainly the same top 4 most seasons. And this was so important because this set Arsenal into the banter era, the one we all know and love, and Arsenal became essentially a laughingstock for a good 3 years. And then Arteta came in and started building them back up again, which we're seeing nowadays, but we can't forget that 2-3 year period where Arsenal relatively were in the trenches. But let's move on to the transfer window, and I think this is one of, if not the most important transfer window we've seen just in modern history. And the reason I say this is because one transfer, Neymar. Neymar moved to PSG for over £200 million. He left Barcelona, he left maybe the best front three in domestic football we're ever going to see, Messi, Suarez and himself. And Neymar said that he wanted to move out of Messi's shadow and try to win the Ballon d'Or. But it wasn't just the fact that Neymar moved to PSG, it was the amount of money that they paid for him. Bear in mind, the highest transfer at the time was Paul Pogba going to Man United for 90 million. So it's not like it was an extra 20 or 30 million, it was more than double what the previous record was. It completely broke football. It just absolutely decimated the transfer market, and it's only really started to recover now. I mean, you have to remember, at the time in 2017, it was Messi, Ronaldo, and then it was Neymar as the third. He was the 3rd best player in the world. But because of that transfer, it also set off a massive chain reaction that we saw in the summer and then the next January. Let's just run through it. So we got Ousmane Dembele from Barcelona. They bought him from Dortmund for about £110 million. That was Neymar's replacement, wasn't it? They panicked and they needed a winger who was going to basically pick up the slack. Virgil van Dijk, he was touted for about 30 to 35 million in the summer. Man City, Liverpool, Chelsea, they're all after him. But then Southampton saw that Neymar fee and went, hang on a sec, the market is changing. So they waited until December. Liverpool paid 75 million for him, which now looks like a bargain, but at the time it was a lot of money. But then that transfer and also Neymar set off the reaction that Coutinho then went to Barcelona, because Ousmane Dembele did not just carry off where Neymar left, so they needed reinforcements, and they spent £130 million on Felipe Coutinho. Prior to Neymar leaving, Coutinho, 50 to 60 million, and would have been a great fee for Coutinho. It more than doubled due to that transfer, and because of Coutinho, Liverpool were able to buy Alisson, Fabinho in the summer, which essentially created the spine for Klopp's great teams. But it just added 30% onto most players' transfer fees. Antoine Griezmann had to go to Barcelona because, again, they needed reinforcements. João Felix went to Atletico Madrid. Both players went for over 100 million. So that is why I think this transfer window was the most important of all time, because it completely changed football. Enzo Fernandez and Caicedo went for over 200 million together. Are you telling me they'd go for more than 80 million if PSG never spent that amount of money? But we'll move on from Neymar because he's not the only big one. A lot of the best players in the world moved in that window. Vinicius Jr., He didn't actually play for Real Madrid that season, but they signed the papers and they bought him from Flamengo in 2017. After Monaco's brilliant season in 2017, where they were just, most of Europe's favourite second club, Kylian Mbappe made a loan move to PSG, which I believe was an obligation to buy. It says loan to buy, and maybe it was an option, but from what I gather, it was £150 million they had to spend the next summer. And before I move on, just go back to Neymar for a second. That has to be one of the biggest blunders of all time, that he leaves one of the best, if not the best domestic side we've seen. He goes to PSG to be the quote-unquote man, and then someone a lot younger than him becomes a lot better than him and becomes one of the best, if not the best player in the world. But then, other than those players, because there were so many important transfers, Mohamed Salah moved to Liverpool from Roma. So if you think about it, you have the most expensive player of all time. You have maybe the best player in the world on his day in Kylian Mbappe, a close second with Vinicius Jr. Ousmane Dembele, who could potentially win the Ballon d'Or this year. Mohamed Salah, who also potentially could win the Ballon d'Or this year. They moved in that window. But it's also a snapshot in time, because we're not going to see these transfers again in the near future, I don't think, because of PSR, because of the financial rules that have come in because of Neymar's transfer. I can't say enough, that ruined the market. And now people are spending 100 million on Jack Grealish, 80 million on Harry Maguire, 80 million on Anthony. Anthony in 2015 would have been a £10 million winger. And it's not a coincidence how we're not seeing huge transfer fees and huge volumes of these transfer fees at the moment. And it also seemed to financially cripple Barcelona. I know there was a lot of pre-existing issues, but it seemed like they were constantly just trying to chase getting Neymar back to the club. But let's finish on the actual football of the season, because maybe it's not the most important in history, but there was quite a lot going on. I think the best Premier League team in history won the league that season, and that was the Centurions in Manchester City. Pep Guardiola's second season in the league, and the first season, a few teething issues. He got top 4, but he didn't really set the foundations, but then he brought in a lot of his own players, and then was the first team ever, and still is, to achieve 100 points. In that season, they averaged about 3 goals per game. It was the final years of David Silva, Vincent Kompany, nearly Sergio Aguero, and the new guard at City were coming in under Guardiola. And I think this is one of probably the most important season in recent history in the Premier League, because it's where football changed. As we all go on about and as we all moan about a lot, Pep Guardiola has changed English football. For the better or for the worse, that is completely for you to decide. But he has changed, and this is the first season that he put his stamp down and went, I am here, I'm taking what I got from Bayern and Barcelona, and I'm taking it to England. And the standards were raised, weren't they? Because it used to be you could get, 80 points and still win the league. After Pep Guardiola came in, unless they had an off season, you had to get in the high 90s to win the league. Liverpool got 90 points in 2 seasons and didn't win the league. We're only now potentially seeing Man City's decline, and Pep's won 6 titles in that time. Let's move on to the Champions League, because this is one of the most interesting Champions League seasons again in modern history. Real Madrid won it, and Real Madrid won 3 back-to-back. They nearly went 5 in a row, but they had an off year when Barca won it. And it was also at the end of Cristiano Ronaldo's tenure at Real Madrid. You'll remember this season because it's one of the most famous goals we're ever going to see under Cristiano Ronaldo. At the Allianz, against Juve, he scored an overhead kick, and we all remember it. It shows how good a goal you've scored, where the opposition fans in their home stadium are on the feet applauding him. It was also the last season at Juventus for a few years, but we thought it was the last at the time for Gigi Buffon. And I think everyone wanted to see Buffon win a Champions League that year, and they were so close. But you remember at the Bernabeu, they conceded a penalty in stoppage time, and let's just call it what it is, it was a penalty. He just went straight through the back of him, but Buffon just completely lost his head. Michael Oliver, how many of us would want to put our hands on Michael Oliver? But Buffon did, and he got the punishment for it, he got sent off, and that was the end of, again, what we thought at the time, his career at Juventus, and his Champions League career had just gone. But to go back to Ronaldo though, he scored 15 goals in the Champions League that year, and that was 3rd most of all time. Number 1 and number 2 also were under Cristiano Ronaldo, and I think it's one of those, especially when you look back, as annoying as he is, and as pathetic as he is in Saudi Arabia, wow, he is one of the best players of all time, wasn't he? People disrespect him and people say he's nowhere near Messi. The man earned his Ballon d'Ors. We also have to remember Roma upsetting Barcelona, which it's a tough one because Barcelona, it seemed like it was the last time it was going to be Messi versus Ronaldo, potentially in the final in their primes. However, saying that, Roma gave us some great moments. We had the Manolas extra time winner and also the commentary to come with that.
Roma have risen
On the other side, you got to remember Liverpool beating Pep's Man City. Oxlade-Chamberlain scored an absolute screamer at Anfield, and it was always fun to see two English sides going against each other in the Champions League knockouts. And of course, Liverpool versus Roma, where Salah scored a great goal against the team who just sold him about 8 months prior to. But could this be one of the most chaotic finals ever in football history in the Champions League? I mean, it has to be the worst keeping performance ever. In Kiev, Liverpool were the massive underdogs against Real Madrid, and it started terribly because Mo Salah got taken off for a dislocated shoulder after Sergio Ramos dragged him to the ground. You can kind of go, okay, what's the worst that happens now? Liverpool lost the best player, but it can't get any worse. Well, it can, because your keeper can throw it straight into Benzema and give a goal away like that. Mane equalised, the stadium went mad, and it felt like Liverpool could win this. And then what happens? Gareth Bale, the man who's been shunned aside by Real Madrid, he gets brought on in the second half. Marcelo puts in one of the worst crosses I've ever seen, and somehow Gareth Bale does an overhead kick right into the top corner. But then even after that, it felt like Liverpool could get back into the game. But then after that, Bale had a shot, it went straight at Karius, went straight through his gloves, and it just completely wiped out any redemption story for the German goalkeeper. So it was an interesting final because on one hand you had Bale, who it could have been seen as a bit of a redemption arc, but I think it was seen as a screw you basically, you didn't play me and I've done this, you can just do without me. You had Ronaldo's last game, it was not great in that final. You had Karius, who just, bless him, but it just ruined his entire Liverpool career, and there we got Alisson, who became, well, probably the best keeper in the world after that. And it also saw Liverpool essentially go on the rise and Real Madrid go on the decline for quite a few years. We also had the World Cup, but that's a bit later on. I mean, France won it. It was important for an England fan because it was the start of, well, the Hope era, which obviously amounted to absolutely nothing, except from a couple of finals where he played terribly in. But at the time, if you were an England fan, 2018 was a brilliant summer for you. But let me know what you think of the 2017-18 season. What happened with your clubs? What happened with your teams? If you could leave a comment below and let me know what happened. Leave a like if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.